Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Disability Equity Office's Accessible Word and Google Docs demonstration. So my name is Phil Deaton. My pronouns are he, him. I work in the Disability Equity Office as our Digital Information Accessibility Coordinator. And today we're going to be running you through a little bit of an intro to how you can make more accessible Word and Google Docs. Before we get started, we'd just like to give a couple of quick webinar tips. Firstly, you can use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. If folks would like to make use of the ASL interpretation feature, that can be utilized by selecting the interpretation button in Zoom and selecting American Sign Language. You may also make use of cart transcription today, and that can be turned on by selecting show captions. So thank you so much to our cart caption provider and our ASL interpreter today. We also wanted to note that this workshop is also being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel as soon as possible. So thank you so much for being here, and do keep a lookout for links to that recording. Alrighty, so I really quickly want to just go through the agenda. Before I get started, I just want to mention that we're committed to fostering an inclusive environment where accessibility and the needs of individuals with disabilities are prioritized, ensuring equitable opportunities for all members of our diverse community. This workshop will help us think about that. So we're going to cover accessibility considerations in documents. These are general accessibility considerations that you should think about as you're creating documents. Next, we're going to talk about how to implement accessibility in docs. So Google Docs, that is. And then we're going to end kind of talking more about implementing accessibility in a Word document. And at that point, I'm actually going to switch my screen share over to a Word document and do a little bit of a demo for you today, which I think we're going to be trying to pass along in the chat as well, if anyone would like to follow along. And then we'll have a few minutes here for question and answer, but please do feel free to use the Q&A feature throughout the presentation. We don't want you to lose your question as you wait to the end to discuss it. So yeah, use that Q&A feature. And speaking of that, we really encourage engagement in these sessions. We're trying to model a comfortable, inclusive, brave, and safe space. Any question is encouraged. We're all learning together. I learned something new about accessibility every day. We're hoping that you'll learn a little bit something new today about accessibility as well. We don't know what we don't know, and please try to respect the experiences of others. Everyone here is at a different level with digital accessibility and thinking about document accessibility. And this webinar is an opportunity to grow and learn. All right. So we're going to go ahead and move into our first section here, which is accessibility considerations in documents. So what is a digitally accessible document? It's a document that can be used by people with a variety of different disabilities. And we can make a digitally accessible document by using principles of universal design, or really design such that a document can be accessed by the broadest range of people possible. And a way that we can get to a more accessible document is by using established digital accessibility standards to maximize access. A lot of the practices that we're going to talk about in this general section and in our demo are going to be basically applying these standardized practices in a way that should support people with disabilities. So one way we assist folks in thinking through accessibility questions on their documents is by encouraging them to ask questions about their documents. So these are a couple of accessibility questions that we tend to ask when we're creating documents here over in DEO. So how can I create structure in my document? Which colors will I use in my document? Will I use images? If so, how will I describe those? So these are just a couple of questions that you can ask yourself as you are creating or revising a document. And hopefully at the end of today's webinar, you're going to feel more comfortable answering these questions for yourself as you create new documents. Okay, so moving right along into the first of our general accessibility tips. We want to talk a little bit more about structures and headings. So Headings are used to help organize information, and they can really be used to add structure to documents. They can create an outline for a page, and you can use headings hierarchically to convey information about how the document should be used. So, for example, if you have a book in a document format, in a Word document format, the title of the book might be your heading level 1. The chapters might be heading level 2s, so chapter 1, 2, and 3 might be heading 2s, and any subchapters that you have, maybe subchapter 3.1, 3.2, those would be heading 3s. We try to use those headings hierarchically to help folks understand a model for the document that they're going to be interacting with. So headings are a key element of structure. And don't worry if that was a little bit confusing. We're going to go into that in our demo section later, and I'm going to show you how to make these changes. Another area of structure and headings to think about is whether or not you're using list items in a document. If you are using lists, make sure that instead of just using a hyphen, for example, that you're actually using the lists and numbered lists features that may exist. So in Microsoft Word, for example, there's a way to simply select a numbered list or an unordered list with bullet points. So that is another way that you can add structure to a document. The second of our general digital accessibility tips that we like to talk about is color contrast. Really, color contrast is the idea of having strong contrast between your text and background colors. So a general practice to consider is that you should use dark colors on a light background or vice versa. If you're wanting to be a little bit more creative with color, we have two recommendations for you. Firstly, you might check out the University of Michigan's Color Brand Guide, which actually has a lot of information about branded colors and how you might use those in a way that maximizes accessibility. Additionally, there's a link in the slides today to the University of Michigan's digital accessibility site, where we have a color contrast guide, which provides a little bit more information. And it also mentions a tool that you can use called the Color Contrast Analyzer. If you are on a University of Michigan computer that's provided by ITS, you can actually download the Color Contrast Analyzer from the Block M icon in your computer from the Software Center, and you can use this tool to measure color contrast. So I do want to show you a little bit about what this looks like. So the color contrast tool, again, can be accessed in the Software Center on U of M computers. I've got two images on the screen right now. The one on the bottom left is an image of the University of Michigan ITS Software Center. And in the search box, I have searched for color, COLOUR, to find the color contrast analyzer. From there, you can download this tool, and then you can make use of it anytime that you would like. The image on the right side of the screen kind of demonstrates what this tool looks like. So there's kind of an overlaid window on the right side of the screen, and you can select the foreground color, which is the text color, and you can use the little eyedropper feature in order to select the text color. And then you can select the background color, which is just any color that is to the background of the text, which in the case of my example on the right side here is just plain white. And what that's going to do is provide a contrast ratio. The contrast ratio helps understand how much contrast there is. To meet digital accessibility standards, you should have a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1. With this tool, you'll see in our example, we have a contrast ratio of 21 to 1. You can also look in the tool, there's an area where 1.4.3 contrast minimum AA, that exists, and you'll see that it says we pass. If you don't want to remember that you have to look in that area, just remember that we have to have that 4.5 to 1 color contrast. Just a note on color contrast. Color is really not a perfect science with accessibility. Everyone has slightly different color vision, and even within different color vision deficiencies, folks may have different vision. So just be cognizant that folks may have feedback about this, And also, it's helpful to consider the colors that you might use at the start of a project. So if you're creating a new PowerPoint and you're wanting to think about color contrast, maybe having a good sense for, hey, I'm going to be using these 6 or 7 colors, and these couple of colors are going to be foreground, these might be my background colors. Things like this help make accessibility decisions a lot easier if you plan this at the start. Okay, so I want to move on from color contrast to talk about another general accessibility consideration, which is providing clear link text. So again, from a universal design perspective, this is really something that benefits everyone. But let's talk about what this is. It's just providing clear information on where a link will take your user, either as the link text directly, which is really best for digital, or adjacent to the link, which might be best for print. So I've got a couple of examples on the screen right now. So here's an example of what would be best for digital. Check out the University of Michigan's color brand guide, and University of Michigan color brand guide is the actual link here. So if you were to click on color brand guide, you would go to the destination, or you would go to the link. For print, obviously you can't expect that someone can just click on this link, so you would want to just provide a little bit of context and then provide your URL. So for information on color accessibility, visit UM's color brand guide, and then we provide the URL. So we wanted to provide an example of something that is not a best practice and something that we see all too often, unfortunately. Just using link text that says click here or learn more can be very confusing, especially if you have a couple of events on a page, for example, and each of them has a link that says learn more. Then folks may encounter a page where they're just seeing links that say learn more, learn more, learn more if they're navigating by links, which could be very confusing. And we really, really recommend having clear link text. Another thing that we get a lot of questions about is typography. And there's a lot of different things to consider here. One thing before we get started on this section is that we just want to say that there's not a perfect science to typography. Different individual users may have different preferences for different font faces that they really like. But we're going to give you a couple of tips that should be best practices that you should consider. So firstly, you should consider the size of your text. This is particularly important, obviously, in presentations that you may be doing. But if you are wanting to make sure that users can interact with your documents, having a good text size is very important. In a document, you're probably going to want to have at least 11 or 12 point plus in most font faces. The size of font faces can vary a little bit, right? So try to make sure it's something that has enough size that you can most easily read it. Another thing that we like to have folks do is consider having distinct heading styles. So we talked about headings a little bit. That's a good way to organize content. And if you have distinct heading styles, this helps sighted users understand what level of heading that may be as well. So not only are we thinking about folks who may be using assistive technology and trying to navigate by headings, but also folks who are just who may be sighted users, who may be trying to understand how to interact with our document. And then a third suggestion that we have is to use sans serif fonts. We suggest this because we want to avoid kind of overly stylistic text. Serif fonts are those that have a little bit of extra text embellishments on some of the different characters. And we really recommend using those sans serif fonts because there's a lot of research out there that they are a little bit more easy to process for folks with a variety of different print-based disabilities. Okay, so the last of our general tips is alt text. So what is alt text? Alt text is a text alternative for an image. So in other words, if you have an image that you're making use of in your Word document, your Google document, your slideshow, etc., you should really have alt text for that image, unless it is a decorative image. So in order to add alt text, you can typically just select the image, right-click it, and hit View or Edit Alt Text. This is generally what this looks like in most applications where you can create content. So going back a little bit to decorative images. Images that are purely there for decoration, that do not add any information or context to a slide, may be decoration. So you really don't need to add alt text to those. If you're trying to understand how best to describe an image, the best recommendation we give is to just consider how you might describe that visual over the phone. This is a good way and heuristic really to get started when you're creating alt text, because you're going to have to provide that information in a succinct way to someone that is not accessing that visual information. And I already talked about this a little bit, but it's pretty easy to add alt text. You usually can just right click an image and edit alt text. This is the case in both Word and Google Docs. Okay, so this next section is going to be talking about accessibility in Google Docs. And before we run into this section, I do want to mention that there is a new tool that is available, and I'll talk about this a little bit more at the end of this presentation. But there's actually an accessibility checker tool now available in Google Docs, which UMITS has provided. But we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end here. All right, so remember we talked about structure and headings as a general accessibility practice that we need to consider. I want to show you how you can actually adjust structure and headings in Docs. So headings can be added and updated in Google Docs. If you already have some text on your screen that you would like to make into a heading, all you have to do is select that text and then go up into the top menu of Google Docs. And in between the zoom feature and the typography or font face feature, you should see something that says normal text. You can actually select a heading level from there. And remember, we want to start with heading level 1 and then move down to heading level 2, heading level 3, using those headings hierarchically. So in the image on the screen right now, I've got that menu open under the normal text area, and I've got heading 1 selected, and I am able to apply heading 1 to that pre-existing text. There's also a way to update your headings to match the current formatting you have. So, for example, if I have some text on the screen and it's, let's say it's 24 point font and it's bolded, what I can do is actually select that text, and you can update heading 1 to match. And what that's going to do is make that into a heading 1, but it's not going to change any of the formatting that you've already applied. All right. So we talked about color contrast as a general accessibility consideration here. So let's talk about color in documents. You can adjust the text color by using the text color feature. Most folks are familiar with this, but it's in between the underline area in the background and link area in the top menu in Google Docs. And in general, remember, using dark text on a light background or vice versa is a really good practice. However, you can always use a color contrast checker if you're more creative with your color choices. One thing I do want to note is that Google kind of pre-populates this grid of different color options, but you can actually select a custom color by using the plus icon in the color area in Google Docs. So let's talk about fonts in Google Docs. Google Docs has a variety of fonts available for use, and again, we really want to recommend using those sans serif fonts. And the way to access the font area in Google Docs is in between the normal text option and the text size option. You'll see the current name of the font listed. In many cases, this might be Arial or Roboto, um, you know, some common font that you have defaulted to in Google Docs. And again, you can actually kind of see what these font faces look like here. So we've got Leto, and you can see what it looks like. This is a sans serif. Calibri and Arial and Roboto are also sans serif. Times New Roman has a little bit of those text embellishments. We can see here on the T, we've got a little bit more of stylistic effect added there. So we recommend using sans serifs, and you can actually kind of use this drop-down feature and mouse through it in order to find one that might work for you. If you're ever curious about recommendations for different sans serifs, again, user preferences vary a little bit, but we're happy to help you out with some suggestions. So just reach out. So next up is links in Google Docs. So if you want to update your text to add a link, we can show you how to do that in this presentation. So basically what you do is highlight the link text that you would like to use. Then you can right-click that text and say Insert Link as an option, or hit Control K. Basically what you do is copy and paste to insert the URL, and then that link text that you have will actually go to that link automatically. So I've got two images on the screen right now. The image on the top right-hand side of the slide is some text in Google Docs, and branded colors is highlighted. And I have right-clicked that, and I'm hovering over the insert link area. And then the second image on the screen is just that box that comes up when you select that option. And I've just added in the URL, which links to the branded colors site. And this one's pretty easy as well. But how do you add alt text in documents? Basically, just click on an image, or right-click that image rather, and select alt text. And from there, you're going to see a box that looks like this image that I have on the right side of my slide, the alt text box. In that section, you'll see a description area. So just click into that and provide alternative text for the image. Again, think about how you might describe it over the phone. There's a variety of alt text resources out there if you're looking to get a little bit more nuanced, or if you have some slightly more difficult content that you're trying to think about how to describe. And the image on the left here just kind of goes and shows what that alt text option looks like when you have right-clicked an image. You can also use Control Alt and Y in order to access that. Okay, so we just went through a lot of information, and this is really how to apply these practices in Google Docs. But we do want to do a live demo in this session. So I am actually going to stop screen sharing for a moment and pull up a Word document that I have that we're going to go through. And this is just kind of a sample document. And I believe that we will be sharing this along later. Oh, Angie's posting into the chat now. Thank you. But this is a great way for you to kind of follow along and see how to apply these practices in Microsoft Word. And we're going to end by showing you the accessibility checker feature in Microsoft Word, which is something that we highly recommend folks utilize, as it really helps to work on accessibility as you go. But anyway, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and I'm going to transition over to sharing my document here. Okay, should have a Word document up on the screen right now. I'm going to make sure that that's what it looks like on mine. Okay, looks like I've got the right information up. Okay, so I've got a Word document here that has a variety of accessibility issues. I'm just going to kind of scroll through it a little bit. So we have creating accessible Microsoft Word documents, some text here at the top, which is a title, kind of describing the rest of the document. Got a couple of different sections, it looks like, some weird use of color, and an image. And then we just have a quick example, which I'll show you all later. This Word document has a couple of different digital accessibility issues. So if you recall back to the questions that we talked about, we had talked about thinking through how are we going to add structure to a document? How do we think about color in a document? Are we using images? If so, how are we going to provide alt text? So we need to consider those questions and consider how we might update this document to ensure we're doing these things. So we've got this text on the screen right now, creating accessible Microsoft Word documents. This is actually acting as a heading, but it is not tagged as a heading. So I'm going to show you how we know this. So I'm highlighting this text, creating accessible Microsoft Word documents. And in the Styles area, in the top ribbon in Microsoft Word, under the Home option, you will see that it's saying this is just normal text. We can actually expand this out, and you can see that there's a variety of ways we can edit this text. One of those ways is to add heading 1 or heading 2, heading 3, heading 4, etc., so on and so forth. Before we do that, I want to just go through this document and see if there might be other headings that we have. I think that scholarship, events, work, and academics should all be made into headings as well, as these are sections, and we want folks to be able to navigate by the different sections in our document. Okay, but this is the first heading on the page, so going back up to creating accessible Microsoft Word documents, what I'm going to do is select this, and I can actually left-click heading 1 in order to make that a heading 1. You'll notice that in my navigation option here, I'm seeing now that this is a heading. But one thing that happened was it changed what my heading looked like, and I did not really want to do that. I really liked how I had styled this heading. So I'm going to hit undo to go back. And instead of just left-clicking heading 1, we can right-click that heading, and there's a couple of different options that we have. We can update heading 1 to match selection, or we can modify what heading 1s look like. What I'm actually going to do is update heading 1 to match selection. I really like how this text is structured. It's just not being tagged as a heading. Now that I have done that, this is again being made into a heading 1. You can tell that because heading 1 is highlighted in the styles area when this is selected, when this text is selected. And it has preserved my formatting. So now that we've done that, we know that we need to use headings hierarchically. I talked about how scholarship, events, work, and academics should probably be headings as well because they're creating new sections. So we've already used heading 1. We need to use heading 2s for these, and these are all kind of the same level of information, it looks like. They were all visually styled the same. And we can see in this list that these are all being listed off, kind of at the same level. So we're going to make these all into heading 2s. So what I'm going to do is select scholarship, and I'm going to update heading 2 to match selection. And then what I'm going to do is, again, go into that styles area, select events, select heading 2. Now that I've updated heading 2 to match selection, I don't really need to do that again. I can just left click these. So I've now made scholarship, events, work, and academics into heading level 2s. So there is one other way that we can modify headings. We have multiple heading level 2s on this page. Say I did want to modify this content and kind of change this heading to be a little bit more visually distinct. What I can do is actually go into the styles area in the top ribbon in Microsoft Word, right-click heading 2, and select modify. This is going to open up an option or an interface where I can change a lot of different aspects related to heading 2. You can do things like change how it's aligned. You can make it center aligned, whatever. You can also make it bold, underlined, italics. You can change the color. You can also do things like increase spacing after the headings. So just for the sake of this demo, for simplicity's sake, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this bold, and I'm going to make it 26-point font. Okay, so we can see we have these headings in the background. When I hit OK, not only is it going to update the scholarships heading, it's actually going to update all 4 of these headings because these are set to heading level 2s. So there we go. That is one way that you can modify headings, and kind of a great method for quickly editing documents. A lot of folks are super excited about this because if you're making use of headings, it's going to make it a lot easier to format those same heading levels later on. So that's a little bit about headings. I do want to talk about another structural feature here. We have what appears to be a list, right? Scholarship, events, work, academics. These are all in what appears to be a list visually to me in the Word document. However, these are not set up as list items in Microsoft Word. I know this because neither the bulleted list or the numbered list option is selected when I highlight these. So what we can actually do is highlight all these list items, and we can make a bulleted list. Or if the order mattered, such as in creating a tutorial where folks might need to follow step by step, we can make a numbered list. For this document, though, I am going to go back and leave it as a bulleted list. So if I click out of this and then click back into my list, you'll see that this bulleted list option is highlighted. So that means that we are using a list for each of these list items. This is really important for folks who might be using assistive technology. While visually this did look like a list, if someone's following along with a screen reader or some other form of technology, assistive technology rather, they would not know that this is, being visually denoted as a list. But now they will, because we've created the bulleted list. So there's one other structural item actually that I want to quickly talk about, and that's making use of blank spaces in Word documents and in Google Documents. So after the bullet item for academics, we actually have a blank line right here. Having one or a couple blank lines throughout a document is generally going to be okay. However, if I wanted to really move this scholarship item onto the next page, if I kind of enter this down a couple times, okay, looks like we've made it to the next page. We now actually have a bunch of blank lines on the page. If someone's following along in your document via a screen reader or some other form of assistive technology, what's going to happen is that each of these lines is going to be read off as blank. So we're going to get this list, right? So list with 4 items: scholarship, events, work, academics, and then blank, 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 so on and so forth. Having a lot of blanks in a document can be really frustrating for folks that are trying to follow along with assistive tech. And sometimes it can also be to the point where they don't know that there is additional content in this document. So instead of just having a bunch of blanks here, what I'm going to do is undo a few times, or backspace here. If I actually want that extra space in between academics and scholarship, what I can do is I can highlight academics, and I can go into paragraph spacing. What I can do is change my line spacing, or what I'm going to do this time actually is go into the more paragraph settings option, and I'm just going to add some extra space after. You'll notice that the highlighted section underneath academics includes this extra space at the bottom of that. If I delete this space, you're now going to see that we actually have the space in there, but there are no blank lines in between academics and scholarship. So this is kind of a smaller, more niche issue that we do encounter from time to time, but it does impact our users a lot. So be aware that if you're having a lot of blank lines, it may be better to instead use the paragraph features to add a little bit of extra spacing before or after, or increase your line spacing. Okay, though, that's enough about structure. We do want to talk about color contrast next. So I'm scrolling down to academics, and we've got some text here: documents that support learning experiences at the University of Michigan. Maybe we should utilize a different color, which is maybe a little bit of a clue that we have a color accessibility issue here. So University of Michigan, maybe we should utilize a different color, is in yellow or maize text, I think in this case, against the white background. And again, if you have light text color against a light background, that's generally going to have some color contrast issues. Also, this text is unnecessarily mazed. This isn't really trying to direct attention to this text specifically. So what I'm actually going to do is highlight this text. I'm going to go over to the top menu in Microsoft Word into the font section under Home. I'm going to select the drop-down arrow next to font color, and I'm going to select black just to match the rest of the document here. So we've fixed up the color contrast issue, but there's another issue in this section, not related to color contrast necessarily, but with link text. So maybe we should utilize a different color, colon, and then we have the URL, brand.umich.edu/design-resources/colors. This is going to be really frustrating for a screen reader user to access, as this whole URL is going to be read off, and it's not really going to be perfectly clear what this URL is going to. So what I'm going to do is highlight this link. Now I'm going to right-click the link and say Edit Hyperlink. This will bring up a window, and we've got kind of two main sections that I want to direct your attention to in this window. There's the text to display field and the address field. We don't want to change the address field because this is the actual link I wanted to use in my document. However, we do want to change the text to display. So I'm going to highlight that text to display, hit backspace, and instead I'm going to type out some good link text. So University of Michigan brand color guide. So now we've updated that link text. I do want to talk about what that impact is. So if someone is using this document and they're using a screen reader, then they may be navigating by links through the document just to see what kind of links are in the document. Now, if they navigate by links, instead of having to read off all these random URLs, they're going to be able to just read off this information, University of Michigan brand color guide. And if they think that that's a salient link for them to interact with, they can just interact with that link at that point in time. Also, this is one of those universal design areas for digital accessibility, where making this improvement is really going to improve the learning experience for anyone that is looking at this document. Okay, so we've got one more thing that I want to show y'all in Microsoft Word, and we have an image. Going back to those three accessibility questions that we asked at the start of this presentation, am I using images in my document? If so, how will I provide text alternatives? So on the screen right now in my Word document, I have an image of the top ribbon area in Microsoft Word where the review section is highlighted, and we can see that there's options for check accessibility, language, etc. For this presentation, I'm really trying to draw attention to the check accessibility option, which is very important to know because context informs the alt text that we're going to provide. So I'm going to left click on my image, then I'm going to right click it. A lot of options come up here, but the one that we're looking for is View Alt Text. Again, in Google Docs, this just says Alt Text, but in Word, it's View Alt Text. All right, so a right side window came up, the Alt Text option. And Microsoft Word actually provides some really helpful informative text around alt text. How would you describe this object and its context to someone who is blind or low vision? You might include the subject or subjects in detail, the setting, the actions or interactions, or other relevant information. Word also suggests that we have 1 to 2 detailed sentences as a recommended length. When you're writing alt text, it's really helpful to be concise with the alt text, but you do want to make sure that you're capturing enough information that folks can follow along. So in this case, it looks like I've actually already entered in some text. So review region of Microsoft Word's top ribbon with check accessibility feature available as an option. And I made a little bit of a typo here, which is a nice improvement that they added to this feature. They did not used to check for that. Okay, so I've created some alt text. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to cut this text out, and I want to point out one other, or actually two other options here in the alt text field. Firstly, there's actually a way to use generative AI to generate automatic alt text. Sometimes the quality varies quite widely with this. If you're going to make use of um, automated alt text through generative AI, we really recommend using it in your workflow, but not using it to create the end product. So if I want to generate alt text for me, I'm going to hit that option. And we're getting alt text that just reads, a screenshot of a computer. AI generated content may be incorrect. And I think in this case it is incorrect. This isn't really providing us with enough information about the content of the image within the context it appears. So there's an option to approve alt text if you think it's great. However, in this case, I'm going to go back because I'm going to delete this because that was not good alt text. There's another option where I can mark an image as decorative. For this demo, I'm not going to select this option. However, if I had an image that just had maybe a flower on it, kind of at the top of my document, and it was really just there for stylistic effect, what I could do is, again, select the image, go into the alt text area, and just mark the image as decorative. So that's a good way to just denote to the accessibility checker that we do not need alt text for that image. I'm going to uncheck that, re-enter my alt text that I've created, and I just brought up this feature called the accessibility checker. And that's where I want to kind of end this demo, is by talking about the accessibility checker. I'm going to exit out of the alt text area. In the top ribbon in Microsoft Word, we've been sticking to this Home tab, but I actually want to move us over to the Review tab. Under the Review tab, in this top ribbon again, there's a section for Check Accessibility. I can select this, and it's going to pull up an accessibility assistant, which is going to document any potential accessibility issues. Now, all the work that we just did would have probably been a whole lot easier if I'd had this accessibility checker running at the start, kind of reminding me to make these changes. So this is one way that you can access the check accessibility feature. I do want to demonstrate my preferred way and really DEO's recommended way, which is which is to have the checker running at all times. So you see at the bottom of my screen, I've got my word count, my text predictions, kind of standard features on, but I also have an accessibility : investigate area here. Clicking this actually opens up that same accessibility assistant. And what's nice about this is that this can be running at all times when I'm creating my document. So I'm going to be getting kind of instantaneous real-time accessibility feedback. And I really recommend that you enable this as well. And to do that, you can go to the File area in the top ribbon in Microsoft Word. And then we can select Options. And this opens up a modal window where we have a couple of different options here, but we're going to scroll to the accessibility option on the left side. And you may see an option to keep the accessibility checker running while I work. I already have this selected. So what I'm going to do is select OK in a minute, but I do want to draw your attention to the automatic alt text option here too. If you're frustrated by having automatically generated alt text done for you, you can uncheck this box if you do not want to see that. I keep it checked just for these demos. All right, so I have turned this feature on. As you can see, Accessibility Investigate. This lets me know that there are at least a few accessibility issues Microsoft Word is detecting. And I left one issue in here for the very end, which is one little kind of obscure yellow/maze period at the end of this sentence. So the accessibility checker is telling me that there is a color contrast issue with hard to read text contrast. If I click into this, it's actually going to highlight the text for me and give me some help text. So current text color is hard to see. Consider using a high contrast color so that the text is clearly visible. There's also an option here to get a learning tip, and this just goes into more detail about this particular accessibility issue. Because I feel pretty comfortable and confident here that I know what this issue is, what I'm going to do is actually just use the automatic text color. Now you'll see the accessibility assistant says, looks good, no issues found. Accessibility checkers aren't perfect, but we've really enjoyed these Microsoft accessibility checkers. Most folks find them very useful. So now let's draw your attention to one more area here for the demo, which is again the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. We see accessibility, good to go. So the accessibility checker is telling me, all right, thumbs up, you've done a good job on this document. And I've been able to make these changes, presumably as I've been creating the document. So at this point, that kind of ends the demo section. I'm going to go back over to my slides. Bear with me for a moment here. And I'm just going to run through a few wrap-up items, really. So as a reminder, we talked about those accessibility questions that you can ask when you enter into a document. So the three that we referenced were, how can I create structure in my document? Which colors will I use in my document? Am I going to be using images? And if so, how will I describe those? So today we showed you how to do that in Microsoft Word with our demo, and also briefly in Google Docs by pointing out these features. But we really hope that as you're creating new documents, you can think about these three questions. And there's other accessibility considerations that we can think about too, right? Like with the space issue and thinking about things like list items, for example. So as you get more comfortable, you're going to kind of develop some of these questions yourself. Real quick, I do want to talk about how you might finalize a document for digital accessibility. So if you're using Microsoft Word, using that accessibility checker, if you have it running at all times, that's great. If not, you can access it in the Review tab in the top ribbon. That is a really great way to kind of finalize your Word document. We really recommend avoiding printing that document to a PDF. Most documents will be less accessible in PDF format than when they were in Microsoft Word or Google Docs format. And if you do port that over to PDF, you're actually going to need to do some additional steps to make that PDF more accessible using the Adobe Acrobat DC application, which folks should be able to download through Creative Cloud in the Software Center. So we really recommend leaving it in that kind of original format. What you can do is actually mark a file as final, read-only, and that's a great way to make sure that folks can A, have access to your document, but B, also add some password protection to it if you're worried about it being modified. So a couple of areas where you can learn more about document accessibility. Firstly, I'm pointing to the Google Docs Make Your Document Accessible link here. This goes to one of Google's support pages, which provides a lot more information about Google Docs accessibility. Next up, we've got the Microsoft Word accessibility link. This goes to Microsoft's corresponding page where they talk about Microsoft Word accessibility. And this is really cool because you're going to see some similar help text to what you would see in the actual accessibility checker. And third, this is a new for us link to add to this presentation. But just earlier this month, Information Technology Services here at the University of Michigan added the Grackle Docs product to our instance of Google at University of Michigan. So if you're using the Google Suite, using products like Google Docs, and even Slides and Sheets, what you can do is download these various different extensions to run in your Google Drive documents. And we find so far that the Grackle Docs feature is super awesome. It's pretty similar to the accessibility checker that you're going to be used to from Microsoft Word or Microsoft PowerPoint, and it kind of helps you walk through how to improve Google Docs in a similar way. You do have to run it in each document that you open up, but just adding that as an extra step before you send out your documents to be live can be a good way to make sure that you are thinking about digital accessibility. Alrighty, so a couple of key takeaways from the presentation today. Again, consider those accessibility questions as you build your documents. If you're asking those questions, then you're hopefully going to be able to think about making those documents more accessible as you go and not have to make those documents accessible later on after you've gotten feedback from users. One thing to note is that both Word and Google Docs have many accessibility features. We pointed out some resources where you can learn more about these features. And we hope that you will be a little bit more comfortable with them. You've seen our demo today. And third and final general tip is really make use of accessibility checkers. Even if you're an experienced and seasoned accessibility pro, you're really going to find them an effective way to make sure that you are creating content in an accessible way. And kind of on the right side of my screen here, we've got some core components of accessible docs. So thinking back to those general accessibility considerations, you should think about your structure, such as through headings and lists. You should think about colors that you're using, link text, different choices that you make around text and typography, for example, using sans serif font faces, and alt text. If you're using images, you should have text alternatives. So at this point, we're going to have a few minutes for questions, but I do really quickly just want to run through a couple of items about what our office has been up to and how you can reach out to us. So I have a QR code on the screen right now, which provides a link to the Disability Equity Office's upcoming presentations and interactive workshops. And you can, use the QR code or you can visit the link in order to figure out what our next sessions are going to be. We have always a lot of new exciting content coming up, and we do try to run through some of our kind of general intros and things like this one every couple of months as well. You can contact us via our initial contact form. This allows us to kind of keep track of your requests, make sure that we're following up. And, you can contact us about things ranging from ASL and CART services to digital accessibility consultations, as well as a variety of other things. You can request trainings or workshops. You can also report barriers to access. So say you're moving around campus and you find some inoperable door openers that really aren't working when you push them. Please let us know about that. We can reach out to the appropriate parties to get those issues resolved. We also like to know about inaccessible software or websites or documents that you find out there. Let us know about that so we can reach out to the original owners and let them know that we've got some work to do. And this next slide is about the voluntary self-identification of disability process. If you would like to, you may update your self-identification of disability through Wolverine Access by selecting the Employee Self-Service portal and then going to Campus Personal Information and then select Disability Status. This information is used to measure the university's commitment to accessibility and is never shared with your supervisor. This is really just important for us to understand the needs that are out there from the disability community and make sure that we are best positioned to support folks. And we already talked about this, but if you want more learning opportunities from DEO, we've got a filterable list of resources, link to our YouTube channel, and our happenings group, which the QR code goes to, as well as a link to a page where we talk about recorded presentations and trainings. And then lastly is our Disability Equity Office newsletter. We usually include digital accessibility tips in that newsletter, so if you're wanting to stay sharp on this subject, it could be a great thing to subscribe to. But we also include various happenings that are coming up around campus. So I did want to check to see if we had any questions that we wanted to talk through a little bit more in detail.
Hi, Phil. This is Allison. No questions currently in the Q&A at this time.
All right, so I'll give it a minute. Does anyone have any last minute questions about digital accessibility? And if you don't know, if you can't quite formulate this question now, again, you can always reach out to our office using the contact form here. Alrighty. And Angie is putting that information in the chat for folks. All right. Well, I think that's all that we've got for everyone. If you do have any questions, please reach out. It's always exciting to see the types of content and amazing work that everyone is doing around the university. And one of our favorite parts of this work is helping to support you in doing all the great work that you're doing. So thanks for attending our presentation today, and hopefully you found this to be useful and a good introduction to these topics. Thanks, everyone.